How are you, everyone? Welcome back to XML and schemas. Today I have a new lab. We finished lab 1. Let's go ahead and look at the lab specifications for this week. I hope all of you already participated on the discussion board I posted online. I think it's important to know the difference between JSON and XML. Please make sure that you read the PDF file I posted on Blackboard. Alright, so look at today's lab. I have lab 2 this week ready for you, but before I start with lab 2, let's go ahead and look at lab 1. In lab 1, I told you it's important whenever you create any XML document that you comment using this information here, your name as a programmer, date, purpose, and the lab number. This week's lab is lab number 2. If you remember from last time, we created lab 1 schema. How do you create a schema? You go to new and then you choose schema. Make sure that you click on customize and choose the default namespace, which is already supplied to you by Oxygen XML. I hope that all of you already installed this application, and the prefix that will be used, XS. Once you click create, you will get a file here with XML opening tag, and then you will get another tag for the schema. And this schema default namespace is this location here. And in my declaration of this schema, I already said that there is a prefix for the schema which is XS. I did not type all of that. Once I created the file, all of that was generated automatically by Oxygen XML, but it is important that you know these components. So if you remember from last time, I told you that this namespace is the default namespace that will be used to look for the data type that we will use in our schema document. As I explained before, for example, if you'd like to specify the data type as a string, you type type equals and then XS, which is the prefix that you specified here, and then you put your data type. Where this data type is coming from? This data type is coming from this location here. That's the default location. So please remember that. Also, we created a root element that is called classroom. So since I have in my schema, I said that there is a root element. So my instance document, my XML instance document, must start with a root element that's called classroom. That's why if you go to lab1.xml, you will find out that the root element is classroom, right? Alright, now let's go back to lab 1 schema. Today we will look at the difference between complex type and simple type. We did not cover that last time. I was just trying to give you a quick lab to get started with looking at the data types and how to connect an XML instance file to a schema file. Today we will look on how to create a complex type and a simple type. So this root element here, classroom, has other elements inside it. So as long as the element has other elements inside it, alright, that is considered a complex type. It's not a simple type. So someone will ask me, how do I create a simple type element? Okay, I created a demo here. Look at this lab2.xml and lab2.xsd. Alright, same thing. This is the opening tag for XML. So you should remember this when you create your schema. This is my schema declaration, and my namespace is this address here, and I have a prefix X XS. That's why whenever I start any element declaration, alright, I have to start with XS. Now I have one element, so I will type element name, and then I provide the name of my element. That's not a complex type. Why? Because I don't have an attribute, I don't have a child elements. That's why I didn't say, or I didn't specify in my schema that this element is a complex type. This element is considered a simple type. Why? Because I don't have attributes, I don't have child elements. Alright, so now let's go ahead and look at how I create my XML instance that is connected or taken the rules from this schema. So I will declare opening tag for XML, the definition. Here you have one element, which is the root element, and the XML namespace, XML schema instance, right? And this is the location for the schema instance. And then XML schema instance, where is the location of the file I'm taking my rules from? That's lab2.xscd, which is this file here. So in my lab2.xml, I am saying here that I don't have a namespace schema location, which is the URL that goes at the beginning of the name here. But since I'm not using it, I will just specify my instance without namespace schema location. So that will look for this file. But please make sure that you have the actual schema and the XML file in the same folder. It's very important that you put both of them in the same folder. Alright? So now I have one root element without anything inside it, and that's the rule for the car root element. Alright, now let's say I would like to put some kind of restrictions on the car. So if I go here to lab2.xml and then type Ford, for example, and then save, and then validate, the document is valid, as you can see here. Now let's say I will go back to lab 1 and look at the scenario here. This is by itself, this element by itself is considered a simple element. Alright, but this element is a complex element. Why? Because I have other elements inside it. Alright, let's go look at the schema for lab 1. For lab 1, look at the car elements. I say here XS element, the name is car, and now I would like to add some kind of restrictions. For example, when I type Ford, I can have only either Ford or Volvo or Dodge, and this is called the restriction. Alright, and you put your selections beside the enumeration element or tag. So now let's use this example for these simple elements for my schema lab 2. So I will just copy what we had from lab 1 here, right? I will copy that, and then I will go to my lab 2. Now, how can I apply the restrictions to this element here? Okay, first I need to make sure that these elements will have closing elements like that, right? Now I have opening element tag and the closing element. Alright, inside here I will put my restriction. It's that simple. So now I have my restriction is considered a simple type. That's why I said here this restriction is type of simple type. And then what do I have in this simple type? I have a restriction. The data type of this restriction is string. Okay, what are the values that will go? That's the enumeration. You put your values beside the enumeration tag, and then value, you put the name of your car. Now if I save here and then go here and then try to put here BMW, for example, it's giving me an error. Why? Because this XML instance document is getting the rules from this schema file. So now I need to change the rules, either to add BMW or change this BMW to match one of these three. So if I come here and add one more enumeration, I will copy this and paste it and then change Volvo to BMW. Now if I save, look at my XML instance and then validate it one more time, it is valid now. Why? Because BMW is inside one of the restrictions. That's it. Okay, now someone might say, well, is it possible that I can use these restrictions with multiple elements? For example, let's say you have a car element and you have a truck element and you have another element that is called, for example, SUVs, and I would like to use these restrictions with all the elements that you have in your code. Some solution, or one solution that you can use, is take this code out of here, go outside of your elements, and then create a simple type and give it a name. Alright, and the name of this simple type will be car type. Alright, so now I give it a name. That's a simple type, and I have a restriction, and my selection will go beside the enumeration, and I will specify the value as Dodge, Ford, Volvo, BMW. Now, how can I link these elements with this restriction? I will come here beside name. Let's first save this. Right, save it. Now go to lab1.xml and then try to put, for example, Google name that is not in the list. Right, now save, validate. It's taking it. It's saying that's right. Google is okay. Why? Because here I didn't put any restriction. It's not linked to any restriction. It is accepting any value. So now I will just go here and then specify the type as car type that I just created. Now I will go ahead and save, go to my lab2.xml, validate. It's broken. Why? Because Google is not one of the list. If I put BMW and then validate one more time, now I don't have any error. I will save again, validate again, I don't have any errors. So now that's a new concept that we are learning today, that you can link a simple restriction to any element that you have inside your schema by giving your simple restriction a name and then specify the type of the element to be that name. I think that's easy, right? Alright, now let's put one more restriction. Alright, I will remove the car type, remove it from here. I will try to make this as simple as possible. Now I will since I removed the restrictions, I need to remove the link as well to this restriction. Now my element doesn't have any link to any restrictions at the moment. Okay, now let's go look at another restriction that you can use. Let's say I would like to make sure that I have a restriction that is saying the car can be either male or female. It's not for the car. Actually, if I change that to gender, for example, that will make more sense. Now I will save. Now go back to my XML documents and then validate. It's not valid. Why? Because car is not my root element anymore. I said here the root element is called gender. So I will go back to my XML file, and then I have to change car to gender. Now if I save and validate, I don't have any errors. Now let's go back to my schema. I need to link this restriction to the gender. So I will come here and then type. My type is going to be the gender type. Now I will go here and then save. Since this XML instance is linked to the schema file, if I go here and then type female and then save and then validate, it's valid. But if I come here and type male and then save, validate, it's valid. But if I type for example, let's say lane and then save and then validate, it's not taking it, it's broken. Why? Because lane is not one of the types of gender type. I can either use male or female. So if I come here and then type male, now it is taking it. That's wonderful. Alright? Alright, now let's go back, take something else. Now we are just talking about simplicity. So I need to remove the restriction, and now I need to use another type of restrictions. So now we use the gender type, we use the car type, right? And let's say I would like to add an attribute. So I will take this from here, go to gender, and then add the attribute. So complex type, name, attribute type, and the name of the attribute is age. What is the attribute? If I go here and go to gender and then type age equals and then open quotation and close quotation and then type the age, save, validate. If you have something like that, this is called an attribute. So sometimes you need to specify some kind of restrictions on the attribute, and you need to state that in your XML schema document. Alright? Alright, so now can I do that? Can I come here, and since this is a simple type, and give it the attribute type, save, and then go back here, save, and then run. Oops, it's giving me an error. When I try to validate, it's saying here that I cannot do that. So now I need to undo what I just did here, save it. Now when I validate it, it's not valid. So I need to fix something in the schema. In the schema, I will remove the link to the attribute. Alright, and then save, and then I will come here and then I will validate one more time. Now it's valid. So now if you add an attribute to an element, that makes it a complex type. That makes it a complex type. So now let's do something. Let's say I would like to create a child element, right? A child element below gender. So gender is the root element. That's why in your lab2.xml, gender is treated as a root element. Now I will remove male from here and then start adding another element here that is called, let's say for example, a student, for example. And then I will close and then save. So since my schema is not restricting that, it's not complaining. I can validate and there is no complaint. But if I go to my schema, now forget about the attribute. Now let's remove this attribute from here and then come here. This is the root element. Inside this root element, I would like to add child elements. So that will make this as, yes, you are right, complex type. Alright, so now I have a complex type. What do I need to add in this complex type? I need to add a sequence of things. Okay, now if I do that, look, I can add a sequence, I can add all, I can also add something that's called a choice. So what is the difference between all, a choice, and sequence? Alright, so if you look here, all means that the child element can appear in any order. Each child element must occur only once. Alright, now what if you choose a choice that indicates, or that this choice indicator, a choice and all and sequence are called indicators. Okay, this indicator will specify that either one child element or another can happen. Right, what if you choose sequence? That means that the child element must appear in a sequence order, Okay, let's practice that. So I will choose here XS sequence, alright, and the sequence order that I would like to appear is, I would like to create XS element. That's my first element, and then the name of this element is going to be student. Alright, so that's my first element. I will copy this element from here, and the second element is called, for example, instructor. Alright, now if I save and go to my XML instance and then try to validate, whoops, I have a problem. Why? Because I have the student element, but I don't have the instructor element. So what I need to do, I need to come here and create the instructor. Once I save and then validate, I don't have any errors. It's valid. Why? Because I am following my schema. Right? Good deal? Good deal. So now let's go back and try to add an attribute that is called age to students. Some of you can do that. You can create a complex type. So you can go to the schema for lab 2 and then go all the way outside, go all the way outside of any elements, but inside the schema. You have to be inside the schema but outside any element, and create a complex type that is called attribute age, and then associate this complex type with this guy here. So now I will type equals attribute type, and then I will save. Okay, now let's go back to my XML document. When I try to validate this document, I need to make sure that under students here I have an attribute that's called age. I will give it a number. Save. Now if I validate, it's working fine. Good deal? Good deal. Alright, so now I apply this attribute to this element, which is the student. Alright, this attribute here, can you give it a type? Let's give it a type as a positive integer. So now let's go ahead and save and go back here and make the age text, for example, and then save and then validate. It's not gonna work. Why? Because in your schema here, in your schema, you said that the type of this attribute is called age. The type of this attribute is positive integer, right? And I link this attribute, I linked it with the student. Now if I go back to my XML file, save or change the number to a positive integer and then save and then validate, it's working fine. Perfect. So now you are in the process of creating a complex XML file and schema. So now let's go back here and try to add something else. Let's say I would like to add some student information using this technique here. So I will go back to my schema, remove the complex type that I'm trying to just make it as simple as possible, and I will remove the link for this complex type here from student. And now I will come here, create a complex type that says student info. Alright, can I link this data here, these elements, to this element? So this element can have child elements. Let's see. I will come here and then I will say type equals what? Student info. So now this element should have a complex type that is basically a sequence, and I will have to have the first name and the last name inside it. So let's go look at first save, look at your XML file, and then remove the actual attribute that we just added. Then save. Oops, I'm getting already an error before I validate. What error do I get? It says here the student element is not complete. One of first name is expected. So this is an element that should have parent, that should have child elements. The first one is first name. Alright, now second one is last name. If I save, now it's working fine. Why? Because I said in my schema, link a complex type that says student info to this element. What is inside this complex type is a sequence of elements. The first element is the first name, the second element is the last name. That's correct. And both of them, the data type is a string. So if I come here and then try to add number for the student name and then save and then validate, it's working because XML is considering the number here as text. But if I come here and change a string of the first name to integer, alright, and then save and then come to my XML and then change the number to Nasser, for example, and then try to save and validate one more time, it's complaining. Why? Because Nasser is not a text, or is not an integer. Nasser is a text, but the XML file can look at the number as a string, but you cannot look at the text as a number. So that's why you are getting an error here. But if I change Nasser to an actual number, which is an integer, now if I save and validate my document is valid. But that's not right. I should change this to string. I was just trying to give you an example of what will happen if you change the data type. Now if I try to validate, it's considers this number as a string. That's why it's not complaining, but I should put here a name, and that is correct. Alright, so that's basically how to add an attribute, how to add restrictions. Okay, now let's do something else. I will remove this data type from here, and I will remove the link for the data type. Save, and then I will go to my XML documents. I will remove these tags from here, or these elements from here. Now I will save. Let's look at something new, something that we did not cover before. Here, this one here. So this is a different type of restriction. A restriction that is simple type. I will go outside of the elements. Before the closing of the schema, I will add a simple type restriction. I need to say I will create a data type that is for the initials. Right. This is regular expression. If you took JavaScript, you should know that. The regular expression, I'm looking for any letter lowercase a all the way until z. But here I'm looking for any letter from A to Z lowercase and from A to Z uppercase. Any letter lower or upper from A to Z, lower or upper from A to Z. So in this one here, I'm looking for 3 letters, A to Z, lower or upper. But for this one here, I'm looking for only one single letter that is only lowercase. So I have 2 patterns. So if I match the first one, that would be okay. If I match the second one, that would be okay. So I have 2 patterns inside this restriction. So let's apply this restriction to the students. So I will come here, and then type is going to be the initial type. So now I will save, come back to my XML file, and then let's remove any spaces, save, validate. It's not valid. But if I put in lowercase and then save, it's valid now. Why? Because this is matching this rule here. But if I remove this rule from here, let's delete this rule, and now I have the second rule, the second pattern. The second pattern is expected 3 letters, A to Z, lower or upper. So now I will save, go back to my XML file, and I will try to validate. It's wrong. Why? Because I need to put my initial. Now if I put 3, validate, it's working fine. So now you know how to use regular expressions. You know the difference between simple type and complex type. You know how to add an attribute to an element. You know how to add child elements. Right, so now we need to start working on our lab. What do you need to do to finish lab number 2? So that was, I already finished the quick lecture introduction. Now I will, let's save this one here. This was just an explanation of what you need to get done. This is actually what you need to finish. I will post these instructions on Blackboard. So let's assume that someone gave you an XML file like this one here. This is an XML file, and I'm asking you in lab number 2 to create the schema that will be used for this XML file. Alright, I will post this data for the XML file on Blackboard, so you will have it. But to finish lab number 2, you need to create this file here, the schema. So let's look at what is happening in this schema. I will just give you a quick hint, and I will leave you finish this schema on your own. As we know that a schema will start by the XML tag here on top. That's a standard. You need to open tag for a schema as the root elements, and then close your schema here at the very bottom. So now let's go back up. I said here that I will use the XS prefix, and I will use this address as the source to define my data type. Alright, now the root element is students. How did I know that the root element is student? Because in the XML file that I'm giving you, if you look here, student is the root element, and I'm already giving you the actual link to the file. Remember, this is just a demo, so what I will do when I post this assignment, I will remove demo, and now your job is to create the actual lab2.xsd. It will look very similar to this one here, but let's look back and return this because I don't have lab2 on my computer, so I will use lab2 demo. But when you create, remember that you link lab2 to the file that you will create, which is going to be called lab2.xsd. XML schema definition. Alright, now, so I have a root element that's called students. In my schema, I said here, please create a root element that is called students, and then close this element. So that is the first step. Now, do I have any elements inside the student's root elements? Yes, I have a student, and inside the students I have initial, I have major, I have years. So if you look here, since I have nested elements, parent and children, that makes these elements a complex type. And now I have a sequence of elements. The first sequence is called students, and that's the first and the last one. So I have opening here for opening for complex type, and that is the closing for complex type. I have a sequence, and that's the closing for sequence. I have an element, and that's the closing for elements. So basically this code is just repeat. I'm repeating myself. Now if I go back here, what is the element name? The element name is called students. What is the maximum occurs for this element? Unbounded, which means that you can repeat it as you need. So now I will go here, I have a student, I have another student, another student, another student. Alright, now remember, this student has an attribute which is called ID. I am expecting you to add your ID to each element. So for my schema, inside my complex type, alright, I have an attribute that is integer. So that will make sure that I will have an attribute inside my XML file. Now let's go back at the XML. I have three elements: initial, major, years. So you need to come here and say that you have a sequence of initial, major, year. So are there any restrictions? Yes. On initial, I have initial type as restriction. Where is initial type? Here. And that is my restriction that I'm applying to the initial. Major, do I have restrictions? Yes, I can have a major of software or networking. And that is the restrictions that is applied for major. What about years? Yes, I have restriction that's called attribute type, which is basically an attribute that is called age. So if you look at the XML file, you will see an attribute that's called age for years. That's it. That's all what you need to do for lab number 2. Please make sure that you comment. Make sure that you don't have any errors. You should have the document as valid. Make sure that your schema is commented as well. You have all of these restrictions. And link these restrictions, you don't have these because you don't have to do the car type, because we already finished that before as the actual lecture demo scenario I showed you at the very beginning. So all what you need to do, you need to finish this section here and create your restrictions and link your restrictions with your elements. And that's basically the end of the schema and the end of chapter number 4. Next week we'll start a new chapter, which is using a cascading style sheet with our schema file, or not our schema, with our XML file. So we will format a web page that will take some information from an XML file or some data and then position it somewhere in our document. And that's why XML is something that you will really need either now or in the future. At the very end of this semester, we might take a look at JSON as well, so we will have both technologies in our hand. Thank you everyone, and I will see you next lecture, or talk to you in next lecture. Alright, bye bye.